4 pours and 7 beers ago, Ben and Matt brought forth on this continent a new way, conceived in drunkenness and intoxicated by the proposition that all podcasts are not created equal. Now we are engaged in a weekly debate, testing whether that notion or any notion so ill-conceived and so repudiated can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield with other podcasts. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who turn us off because of our naughty words, that our diatribes might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense we cannot defecate, we cannot conjugate, we cannot swallow this content. The brave men, living and dead, who failed here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember, or even listen once to what we say here, but it can never forget about the time Matt sexualized Tom Hanks. It is for us, the barely making a living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work of projects we've started, but thus far have so nobly not advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from the last pint we take increased devotion to that cause for which you tune in each week, that we here highly resolve that no movie will remain undiscussed, that this nation, underdog, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this podcast of the people, by us people, for no people, shall not perish from the earth. Listener discretion is advised.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eye.
This may be the last chance I'll ever have to tell you to do anything. So I'm telling you, shut up.
But you presume to know everything about me because you saw a painting of mine. You ripped my fucking life apart.
We celebrate our Independence Day. Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me and naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Welcome once again to the New Wave Podcast with Ben and Matt. I'm Ben.
I am Matt.
And thanks again for tuning in. And this week is a momentous occasion, Matt, because we were requested to do a topic.
This is true. We very rarely get requests. We actually received 2 within the last week. We're doing one of those tonight, and we will probably do the other one coming up soon.
Now, unfortunately, one of them was my wife, and the other who has been on the podcast twice.
And wanted a way to be on it again.
He was like, yes, another way to get free beer.
Well, the thing that cracked me up with Greg's was like, he was like, hey, like, I kind of have this idea for a podcast, but, I mean, it's really a kind of, I guess, just to, like, get me on another one. I was like, dude, you don't have to, like, suck up. You want to be on the pod any week? You want to just be on the podcast?
Sure.
Come and be on the podcast, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I think Greg's pretty much welcome anytime.
I would say so.
Anyways, well, but thanks again for, of course, checking us out again this week on our website. You can go there, lastpintprod.com. We've got some stuff, going on. You can
Some
click
stuff.
Some stuff.
We have some
Like
stuff going on.
Some stuff. Some scripts and some other shit. You can click through there, or you can, of course, go on the Facebooks at lastpint, or facebook.com/lastpint, or at lastpintprod on Twitter, which we are still in the process of building.
Yeah, I gotta get around to that Twittering. I think I also have a Tumblr for us somewhere.
Matt has delegated so much of the workload for the Last Pint stuff as far as the social media stuff is concerned to him. Maybe I could do Twitter.
I would love for you. I gotta be honest, I work in social media. I fucking hate Twitter.
You know what? The thing is I never saw the point of it, and I still don't. I don't think it's a great way to communicate. I hate the way that it stutters the English language and the way that it compounds basically everything that's wrong with our short attention span society into an arena where everybody is forced to use it nowadays, which I feel like that's the way it is. But it is kind of cool when people like Felicia Day and Jon Favreau direct reply to you, and I'm like, oh, hey, Jon Favreau is talking to me. Just in that voice, exactly.
In 140 characters.
Yes, exactly. And I write back, and I'm like, Felicia Day, marry me if I wasn't already married.
Do you think, like, Beth would allow, like, maybe some sort of big love, communal sister-wife relationship with Felicia Day?
There might be a couple of other people that she would allow that. I don't think she's a big enough Felicia Day fan for that to matter.
Huh.
But
who would she allow?
Oh, Bruce Willis. See, it's the opposite kind of big love. It's where she gets all the.
And Bruce. I had no idea she was such a Bruce Willis fan.
You never knew that?
No.
Oh wow! It's
like never discussed Bruce Willis.
Yeah, I think she used to refer to him as her husband.
Wow,
her husband Bruce
Brucey.
Willis. Yeah, it's kind of a weird one. I mean, my wife isn't the typical person who I think you would talk to and assume. Like, I don't know. My wife is the type of person that I think after I initially met her and started, dating her for a while, I would assume somebody like, well, you know what? It's funny because some of her others kind of fit, like Michael Pitt.
Yeah, I get that.
Or somebody along those lines. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then, like, her number one, numero uno, is Bruce Willis.
Who I think should have been the new Batman. Bruce Willis for old Batman.
That's not bad.
Bald Batman, man. I could totally see that working. Bald Batman, by the way, definitely a sex move. Give me the old bald Batman.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother joker.
No.
That was awful. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Anyways,
it's just good because you'd have at some point Batman would do that Bruce Willis laugh.
Yes, of course.
That'd be amazing. So, no segue whatsoever. We're just gonna say that this week's podcast is brought to us by Beth Wilson, Fincannon Wilson. Is there a hyphen? Is it just a
no?
Beth
It's Beth Wilson.
Is about movie and TV monologues. Which is speeches
or monologues, and really, I think that the thing that because when I brought up to you, Matt, I didn't come up with any sort of caveat to it, but the thing that I was going to kind of at least put on it initially, as far as what my list or the things that I want to talk about concerned, is I don't consider voiceover a speech or a monologue, so I wanted to extricate that. I don't really consider. What
if it's used in both situations? Like,
well, here's the thing: if it starts with somebody talking, and you're seeing them talk, and you're seeing things happen that they're talking about, then it makes sense to me. Then that's fine. I think that considers, because you have somebody who's physically performing.
Yeah,
I think it has to have start or come back to somebody who is actually physically performing. Like an instance that wouldn't work for me is American Beauty. Like I love the opening and close of American Beauty, especially the last paragraph. Great voiceover usage or bad voiceover usage could be a really fun podcast at some point. But even though that's considered a speech, he's performing that as in only strictly a voiceover context. So I don't like.
Okay.
I don't want to include something along those lines. If it's something where you see them start talking about something, and then you see.
Yeah.
There's one particular movie I have in mind that I'm going to mention that has two of my favorite voiceovers of all time, and both of them show things that are going on.
Yeah.
While somebody's talking about that or something else. Basically.
All right, I'll go with that. I have one myself that I want to discount, which you may disagree with, but I don't want to include sports movies in this.
You know, I actually kind of wanted to just talk about sports movies very, very briefly at the beginning, because the way that I have a top 5 list basically, and these are the top 5 that just kind of came to me. I probably have left something off that I'm really, really pissed off about.
Yeah,
but other than that list, I came up with some great sports. Monologues or speeches or things.
There's
that are
so
fantastic.
many.
There are so many. I mean, it's necessary to the genre, for you to have those. There are some that I feel that stand above the pack, and I love those, and I want to mention those in a second.
And I have one, yeah. That's...
And so we can discuss those, but those don't make my list, like my list, you know.
One sort of, I say no sports movies, and I realize one of mine is, it's a sports movie, but it's not a coach motivational speech. And I think there's a very different, that's kind of where I'm looking at the ones that, there's so many, like, going through the list, kind of as I was going through this big group of stuff, I started to see a lot of repetition, just in general. Think, okay, you've got sports movies, you've got war movies, any movie that has to do with battle or war, or anything. You've got these motivational speeches that are synonymous with the genre. Like, you have to have these moments. The other one I also came up as far as a caveat, and I'll just say that you have to limit it to one if you go into it, is no Al Pacino. Because Al Pacino has a monologue or motivational speech in every single movie he has ever been in.
The funny thing is the one I only... And because you're right, Pacino has a lot of speeches, and a lot of good speeches, too. Mm-hmm. Funny enough, the one that I was going to mention from Pacino is a sports movie. It's Any Given Sunday. Yeah. Which I don't even like the movie Any Given Sunday.
Goddamn quarterback.
No, I don't even like the movie Any Given Sunday all that much. But
it's a bad movie.
It's I mean, and the funny thing is that movie gets a shit ton of love. I don't understand it.
I don't get it. I think it's a terrible.
I really don't understand it. But the speech is really good in that movie. Like, I love it where he's like, he's inches away between living and dying. You know, that whole thing where he's getting everybody pumped up. Where he's like, I wrecked every relationship I've had in my life.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, yeah.
Well, even though it's really not quite to my list, I do have to say, for me, my favorite Pacino monologue is Scent of a Woman.
Of course. Well, that's everybody's favorite.
It's a ridiculous grandstanding performance in sort of a scene that makes no logical sense in the movie, which up to that point is actually not... I think that movie definitely, obviously, is super mainstream, but I enjoy most of the beats in that movie. That final one's a great scene, but it's, I think, a terrible scene as far as making a better film.
Sure. No, I can completely appreciate that. But Al Pacino, no Al Pacino, I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, I'm fine almost just completely eliminating anybody from one of those, your De Niro's, anybody who, even though De Niro's monologues are much further and fewer between one another, as there would be like a
What about little Jack Nicholson? In a little play written by Aaron Sorkin, Few Good Men.
Well, I thought about it, but once again, the great scenes in like A Few Good Men are more, and that's one thing. Sorkin doesn't do monologues well. I don't feel like. I feel his monologues are very repetitious and they're very perfunctory. Sorkin's talent, if you want to call it a talent, his forte is interplay. He likes dealing with a lot of different people who are talking. And the funny thing is, here's one of my criticisms has always been of Sorkin, is that it's his style. It's very much like Kevin Smith, where it's very clipped, and you have people talking, nobody interrupting one another, and they're all saying these perfect things with no stuttering and just so quick, and so the delivery is just. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, this is the room of the smartest people who have ever existed in the history of the universe, and they're all in Sorkin's head. But the funny thing is that
they all play. It's not just one. It's each one of them plays off of like the rhythm the other one. Like they speak in these beautiful poetry.
It's basically Kevin Smith to the nth degree. Like Kevin Smith does the exact same thing. Has always done the exact same thing with his dialogue, where it's very forced. It's very clipped, and it feels unnatural at some points. Sorkin kind of takes it to another degree. But the funny thing is I've always thought that about Sorkin. It was like 2 episodes of The Newsroom ago. It was like somebody all of a sudden he like lectured him on that, and he was like, "What? I do what? Because there was this one scene that was like 6 minutes long where nobody could complete a sentence. Like somebody else would cut them off.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because it came out of nowhere. I'm like, wait. I was just watching The Newsroom and now I'm watching like, it was really funny because I felt like I went from watching something that Sorkin did to something that like Altman did. Where everybody's cutting everybody off and then people start talking over one another and you can't understand what some people are saying. So it was, I don't know. And then, of course, in the next, I think it was 2 episodes ago, and then the next episode, it went straight back to being Sorkin. So maybe it was another writer. Who knows?
It's possible that was who got fired that week.
Sorkin was like, I don't like this.
I didn't feel that these were the smartest people on Earth. Fire him!
That sounds like Sorkin. Anyways, well, so now that we've meandered around a little bit, I mean, I can go ahead and list off a couple other sports movies I was...
Yeah, go for the sports.
Well, Miracle, obviously. Now, the Miracle, which we've talked about before, is a fantastic... It's a great sports movie. The speech that Kurt Russell gives is the speech that was given in the locker room before the game. Verbatim. So... I mean, in one place, I hold it in very high esteem just because of the performance. Kurt Russell completely sells it. But it does kind of set apart because it's not, I don't know, it doesn't feel so much, like you were saying, it doesn't feel like a monologue or a speech so much as it does. It just feels like a motivational thing.
Yeah.
But it was really well done. The other sports movie I was thinking of was... oh, shoot. What was it? There was one other that I had on my list. And it just
I have James Earl Jones and Field of Dreams.
That's really
I still
good.
think is
I didn't think about that.
One of the prettiest delivered monologues. Just everything about just the way it's shot.
Do you count that as a sports monologue?
That's what I was saying. I had it on my list, and I'm like, I said no sports movies, but it's not really a sports it is. It's about baseball,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
I mean, it's just such a great character moment, and he does it with that smile and that very calm delivery. It's just gorgeous.
One of the things that works really well because Phil Alden Robinson is a writer who loves lengthier speeches and lengthier moments where you're having one. For example, Ben Kingsley in Sneakers has a couple of really great pseudo speeches, pseudo monologues that you could consider them right there along those lines, even though there's sometimes a little bit more interplay involved. He's very good at directing his own speeches that he writes. I mean, they're very poignant. They often have a very clear point, but in the performances that he's written and directed, it's like, it seems like if you read it, you'd be like, wow, this is a little over the top. And then you see it in the context of the movie, and you're like,
it always plays note perfect.
How could this be any different? Like, how could this be any more perfect? It's hysterical.
Just to do one kind of as you were talking about, and I tried to mix up so they weren't all like heavy, amazingly emotional speeches and stuff like that. But you brought up Kevin Smith, and I think Jason Lee in Mallrats, when he's telling the story about his Uncle Walt on the plane where the plane's going down and everyone starts masturbating, is just a really it's a story, and that's also where it kind of gets difficult. Is this a speech? Is this a monologue? Is it just a character telling a story?
I think
Can they be all the same?
No. I think because I have one that's very much a story. It's on my top 5.
I have a feeling our top 5 is going to.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some crossover, and I think we're also going to have some that we are not expecting to be on there.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay, so those are the major sports ones that I could think of. Now, here are the others. So we were talking about preparing for battle.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that are obviously you have to mention as far as preparing for battle, like Braveheart.
Yeah.
Or
Patton.
Well, that's the thing. Patton is. And when Beth mentioned it to me, she was like, "What's one of the best speeches of all time, or motivational speeches?" What she said. She made that specific comment, and I was like, "Patton." That's the first thing that popped in my head was motivational speeches.
Yeah,
because it's a motivational speech. Now, like I said, you've got Braveheart. I'm not going to talk about Patton. Patton's a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
used to have a much... When I was in high school, it was probably one of my top... Patton sat right next to The Great Escape as one of my favorite movies of all times. And Patton is not a movie that's grown well with me. I feel way less attached now every time I watch Patton than I did when I first saw it as a middle schooler.
Yeah.
But
well, it's a movie made for middle school boys. Like, it's I think there's like I think there are the two areas where you come to Patton and you kind of fall in love with it, or when you're in that young, like... Impressionable cowboys and Indians kind of, this war type thing. Or when you're old and grizzled or went through war, or you're kind of like an old veteran or an old person.
Sure.
It's that middle group, like where we're at right now, that's kind of... I look at it and I'm like, it doesn't work for me. It doesn't...
Sure. And the same thing I mentioned earlier before in a film I've mentioned before is All Quiet on the Western Front. Same thing. The opening speech in the class, basically, of riling these boys to enlist, it stands among a really great, as a really great monologue, and very early in the medium, too. I mean, this is in the 30s. But I consider it more of an inspirational speech, like the way I would consider Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, or Braveheart, or one of those, where it's they're prepping the troops for battle.
I was going to ask... I was going to make a suggestion. You can nix this. I was going to say right now, I want to go on a limb and take a guess that Ben and I have the same number one. And I'm curious if you want to blow your load up front. I don't know how it couldn't be the same one, but maybe I'm off about that.
I really don't think our number one's going to be the same.
Okay.
I think what you might think is my number one is probably my number three.
What's your number three?
So you're basically just asking me to come out and say...
I want you to come out and say...
And it's one you think we both have on our list.
Yes.
Is it a story?
Yes.
Is it told...
Historical.
Is it told in the context by somebody who is there?
Yes.
Does it involve a boat?
Yes. Of course it does.
Does it involve sharks?
Yes! Of course it involves the USS Lusitania. How could it not? Okay. Robert Shaw's...
Indianapolis,
not Lusitania.
Oh, it was like Lusitania. What are you talking
know where the hell that came from. The monologue in Jaws, I say almost unequivocally, has to be looked at as the greatest movie monologue of all time. It is...
Okay.
It is flawless in its execution. It sets up a character instantaneously in a scene. Everything you need to know after this monologue. And it's completely extraneous to the plot. When it really comes down to it, it's a complete character moment.
I agree with all of that. And here is I think that it's not extraneous to the plot to me, because you're right. It is a character moment, but what that does is it makes Robert Shaw's character relevant. I mean,
yes.
It brings him as a full person, or this. All of a sudden, you understand Ahab.
Yeah,
It's really showing that other. Here's where this motivation's coming from, and here's the type of person that this guy really is, and it is brilliant in its execution. There's very little that you could find fault in it, and it's brilliantly done, brilliantly written. I do love it. It's number 3 on my list. Unfortunately,
is Independence Day above Jaws on your list?
No, Independence Day is not on my list. And so, actually, that's before we get into whatever else I have as my top 5. There are obviously some really very, very famous speeches that are in awful movies.
Yes.
Or just movies that don't, they don't deserve the speech, or the speech just is ludicrous and ridiculous. Yeah. Like Independence Day, whatever. It is Independence Day. It's entertaining. It's stupid.
This is our Independence Day.
It is our Independence Day. But apparently it's the fan favorite. Like when there was a thing online, everyone was like, Independence Day is the greatest movie speech of all time.
That's amazing.
Well,
to me.
that's the American populace for you. I mean, so obviously we're that out of touch. We will never have a popular podcast because we do not like Independence Day.
I recognize the importance of that movie. I just that speech is ridiculous. I had something that was a good. Well, just in general, talking about good speeches and bad movies, and you may completely disagree with me on this. I have a feeling we maybe outside of the podcast talked about this once, but there's a monologue at the end of a very uneven film that was very popular at the time, but I don't think has aged well as far as public opinion, which is the adaptation of John Grissom's A Time to Kill. And I still think I remember watching Matthew McConaughey's. He has like a big speech at the end of it. That's like his closing argument in the trial, and it is in content. It is ridiculous and over the top, but something about the execution of that speech always I watched the movie and I wasn't crazy about the movie, but I remember walking out of it and be like, "Good God, that guy is going to be a star," because I couldn't take my eyes off the screen during that speech. I thought it was really just, it's not going to go down as my top monologues,
sure,
but I think it's a really powerfully delivered monologue that could easily not be delivered well.
Sure, absolutely. And it's funny, I was very dismissive of De Niro earlier, but we're still talking about kind of runners up and the different ones that we were talking about. One of my favorite just in terms of being sucking you in is De Niro's monologue as Capone in The Untouchables.
Baseball.
Well, what gives me joy? He's like as part of the team. 1 minute the plate alone or whatever. That scene is just rife with tension, and it's all delivered so perfectly well. I would never pretend to think it was one of my top monologues or top speeches of all time, but in the context of the film, it's a pretty stark turning point where you're like, shit just got...
It is very much where you're looking at him as kind of this not comical, but it's like this bad guy that's fun.
He's a caricature until that moment where you're like, well, this guy's an asshole and mass
holy
murderer.
Cow, that's uncomfortable. Yeah, and there's another one on my list similar to that. I had it in my head. Well, there are... It's funny. Maybe we can start on our list because I kind of have each of the ones I've picked sort of represent a genre or a type of character.
Sure, no, that's good.
And then around those, kind of orbiting those, are the other lesser versions of that.
Well, I'm interested in... Do you have them numbered or you just have them?
I don't really have them numbered, but I could.
Well, if you say that Jaws is number one, then you've gotten one out
I've got one out of the way.
So
I'd say Jaws is number one. I'll pick another one.
Whatever you consider the fifth, like the last in those lines.
God, it's tough.
Yeah, I know it is difficult.
I'm gonna go with Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight, talking about the scars.
Okay.
It is a small... First of all, there's a problem in that movie in that most of Ledger's scenes exist as monologues. Other than he's got...
They're not really monologues. They're just kind of like
long, speechy... There's not a lot of back and forth except for when he gets in with Batman, and then there still isn't really a lot of back and forth because Batman doesn't talk a lot. He just sort of grumbles his two words, and then Ledger just continues to steamroll in with his thing. But that was kind of for my villain, I wanted to take one that's a really good, meaty villain speech, And what I like about it in that movie is another one that's all about context. That the first time he's telling this story, you're on the edge of your seat. And, I mean, obviously, it's being done with this tense scene. He's got a knife in someone's mouth, and you don't know what they're going to show or what's going to happen. And he tells this amazing story. And then later on in the movie, he launches in story.
Sure.
And that was really Get These Scars speech with someone else, and he starts to tell a completely different story.
Sure.
And that was really what sold me on the first one, is that you're watching this amazing monologue performance that's actually the character putting on a performance, which is difficult to differentiate between. And, and there are other great monologues from villains. That's why I said there are kind of other things orbiting stuff like Silence of the Lambs. Anthony Hopkins and Silence of the Lambs talking about,
Right.
his feeding of Clarice, telling her story and going back through
Which
it.
really is a two-person.
It is more of a there are that one's kind of on there. And the other one I had is and again it's not really a monologue, it's more of a scene,
which is really funny. Actually, I want to go on a quick aside. One thing you might notice when you were like starting to put together a list of things that you thought about, did you not find it funny that a lot of times you're like, oh, this is a great speech, and then you think about it more and you realize that the person who you're thinking about speaks less than the other person you've seen. And it's really I think that's one really good indicator of a strong performance is when the person who is speaking less in the scene, like your Hannibal Lecter against Jodie Foster, he's eliciting a story from Jodie Foster. It feels like his monologue.
They're like puppeteers.
Exactly. He's pulling the string.
Yeah.
Which is a really, really fantastic thing, and there are lots of performances that we could probably speak to on that. But I ran into the same problem where I was sitting there thinking about, like, oh, this is a great... And I was like, that's not... It doesn't qualify to me as a speech.
Yeah, and it's tough. And and I did by far the least prep. I prepped for this here at Ben's as we were eating dinner. But yeah, another one is sort of a little bit of the food. Ben cooked a delicious quesadilla and southwestern salad. Thankfully, he kept the salsa with corn away from it because I subscribe to the church that does not believe in corn being put in sauces, soups, or anything like that. Corn should exist by itself. The other one I had in mind that's sort of in the same vein, but probably I guess a little bit more of a monologue is...
Children of the Corn?
No. That would be amazing. I like that. Is 7. The car ride in 7 where John Doe is... essentially monologuing, about his deeds and what he's done. And you have back and forth, but essentially there are certain ones where you've got to say, okay, there might be other things discussed, like going back and forth, but for the most part, that is John Doe steamrolling through his own speech. The asides don't really matter. He's telling one thing. But those were, I think, my main... villain ones. I have another one that I debated actually making my top 5, and it might still. So I'm going to hold off on that one, just in case.
It might still make it.
It might still, because I haven't not really numbered these. I have 3 more that I can fit. Okay, 1, definitely. 2, definitely. 3. Oh yeah, I probably won't make it. Is Rutger Hauer at the end of Blade Runner.
Well, I knew that, it's funny because once again, that's a great scene.
Yeah.
And it's a continual scene where he's basically still talking. He's kind of monologuing.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Some of it's improvised, which is really, really interesting. And
he improvised the best part of...
the best line.
Best line. The raindrops...
yeah.
Was it raindrops... like washing away like so much. I forget.
No. The line is I've seen battleships off the belt of Orion. They fall like tears. Or they fade away. They disappear, fade away like tears.
Tears in the rain. Yeah,
is the line.
How has "Tears in the Rain" not been made into a song?
I'm
How
sure
has
it has.
someone not made a hit ballad called "Tears in the Rain"?
It's probably Meatloaf. It was a B-side
with Rutger Hauer in it, just speaking "Tis in the Rain."
I'm sure it probably already exists as a Meatloaf B-side.
All right, so what else you got on your list, sir?
Okay, well, if you want me to go to number 5, I could. Yeah, because like I said, I've already given you number 3. And here's my number 5 is sort of quintessential to the list because it's considered one of the greatest speeches of all time. It is very classic. It is very well known.
Can I make a guess?
Yes.
Glengarry Glen Ross?
No.
Shit. Okay, go ahead.
No. There's no Mamet on here. Funny enough.
Wow.
I did not make any Mamet. No, it's one of the most famous speeches of all time in 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Spencer Tracy.
Oh God, how did I fucking forget that.
It's a 14-minute speech.
It's amazing.
And also makes the film... of course, he won the Oscar posthumously for his performance in that movie. It's still, to this day, one of the best monologues or speeches where you're not communicating a specific emotion or one specific thing. Like that's one problem I have with a lot of the villain monologues. Is it's like it's great, but you're eliciting a certain emotion. You're trying to get one thing out of the audience based off of what it is that they're saying. Even though you might be communicating something great about the character, you're only focused to get one thing out of the audience, basically. Whereas you're supposed to make this round-the-world journey and that whole speech at the end of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And it works, strangely enough. And the really funny part about the monologue, the performance of the monologue, is that a lot of the stuff, like right at the very beginning, first off, I know that Hepburn and, I forgot who plays his wife, there were actors in the scene. I think a vast majority of the actors who actually were in the scene had never read the speech. They didn't know what was coming, basically. And so it was through the course of these, multiple takes that they... But I know that I still remember reading that the line where he's like, "Honey, I love you, but shut the hell up."
Yeah.
It was a completely... not an improvised line, it was a written line, but she didn't know the line was coming.
Yeah.
And so you can just see how she just gets completely taken aback. So it's a testament to good direction, excellent acting, and then of course one of the best written monologues where you're going over sort of he runs it like it's a dissertation or a law.
Well, and you're also hitting on an important part, and you kind of talked about that when there's like a two-person back and forth, but part of what makes that scene work so well are the reactions and the responses that the monologue elicits from the characters on screen, which you don't always get. Like, a lot of times it feels like when someone derogatorily talks about someone monologuing, it's usually where there's just someone speaking and there's no one else. No one's really reacting to what it is. Either they're in a character that can't react. If you're in a Bond movie, Bond can't have this response necessarily to certain things because he's got to play it cool. And that's one of the few where you're watching the change in emotion through all of these other people in different ways and their own stuff, and it just feeds the monologue like a fire. It's really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my number 5. Do you have another one that you want to bring up?
Well, I'll talk about this one. I think I may wind up having 6. I had forgotten about it. I just mentioned it before. Glengarry Glen Ross is, it's an easy choice. It's a very obvious choice. Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross has a monologue that anyone that's ever done any theater work or been in a theater class has studied, has attempted to deliver. It's one of those that I feel is just note perfect. And it is another one one of the few ones where you have this really powerful monologue going on, but you're also feeding off of reactions from all of the other characters and their stuff. You've got, you've got the cocky salesman, you've got the old salesman, you've got all these people that are feeding these different reactions, and him just destroying everyone's perception of what their role is in that office. Boom, 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 like a cannon. It's great. It's great. It's great fun movie making. It's not anything I think that's like super meaningful or deep. He's fucking talking about selling, but it is
absolutely.
And it's something that people have tried to recreate in movies ever since and never can hit it. Sorry, Ben Affleck and
Boiler Room. I was about to say,
he couldn't do it.
Ben Affleck.
Yeah, who gets the last laugh? Mr. Batman Affleck. That's right.
Yeah.
He better have a Boiler Room Batman monologue.
He was the bomb in Boiler Room. I'll go to one.
You think you're a superhero? You think you're a better superhero than me?
I'll go to what I had as number 4, which is kind of a weird addition to my list because the movie's great, but it's not one of my favorite movies of all time. It's not one of the things. and it's probably, I think it is definitely the most recent of all the films that I have on my list, is Jean-Claude Van Damme's speech in JCVD.
Still never seen that.
Okay. It's this really, I mean, for those who haven't seen the movie, first off, it's a fantastic movie. I have it on DVD. I should just give it to you.
Yeah.
It's a very, the story, the basis of the movie is very funny. It's Jean-Claude Van Damme playing Jean-Claude Van Damme. As himself, he gets held up, basically. He goes to a bank and is part of a heist. He's there while the heist is taking place. The people who are robbing the bank realize who he is and take him hostage. But the problem is everybody's a fan of his. So they want him to be, like, they want to be friends with him. So they want to keep him away from, then the hostages are all friends. The hostages want him to be Jean-Claude Van Damme and, like, save them. So it's this very hysterical dynamic where Jean-Claude Van Damme is playing himself in this very precarious, this very weird situation. And, it's a hysterically funny movie. It's a dark comedy. It's got a lot of weird violence in it, very unexpected violence in the movie. It's pretty interesting, and a lot of people considered it one of their favorites of the year it came out in 2009.
I heard always great things about it. I just never got around to see it.
In the movie, now if you're talking about a movie that wants to take it off the rails, now this movie is all based in the third person. You're watching this unfold, and you're seeing this story. And at one point, he's chained to a chair, or is sat in a chair, and the chair elevates in the room. You're looking right at Jean-Claude Van Damme, and elevates to the next floor, to the attic. I mean, you don't know what... I mean, like I'm saying, you're just watching this, and you see the room kind of disappear. And it goes to the attic, and for 7 minutes, Jean-Claude Van Damme just talks to the camera, and talks about his life. And it's one of the most moving and saddest monologues I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, he cries. He's crying through a majority of it, basically talking about how his life has fallen apart, like why the expectation that was laid on him as being, the muscles from Brussels, the things that kind of derailed his life, his problems that he has, the issues that he has emotionally. And he talks about it in this just incredibly candid, just bearing his soul. And it's real. I mean, that's the thing. It's him. I mean, he's playing himself, but he has this speech. And it's one of the things where it's like, people, I still remember when the movie came out, they were like, I would nominate Jean-Claude Van Damme for an Oscar just for his performance in this monologue, because it's just so raw.
Yeah. And
it's a beautiful moment, and then after the 7 minutes, it goes back down to the floor, and the movie continues.
It's interesting.
And there's never any mention. And it's like putting the movie on pause and then watching Jean-Claude Van Damme tell you why this movie was made.
Yeah, it's like a commentary in the middle of the movie.
But it's incredible. And
sounds interesting.
And it's incredible in its presentation, and it's incredible in the context of what is being said. So that was my number 4, just because it's the most unexpected monologue that I would have on my list, or speech that I would have on my list, but it's gorgeous. I mean, it really is beautifully done, and it is one of the... It was, like, I think it was 2009 that JCVD came out. It might have been 2008. But I still remember when I saw that movie that year, I did not see a performance that year that I thought was better than Jean-Claude Van Damme's in that movie.
Wow. I'd never have expected that one in a million billion
You know who
years.
held my same opinion on that was Harry Knowles.
Oh, really? I remember JCVD was huge on Ain't It Cool, and it's just one of those
Harry Knowles was like, it was my favorite performance of the year. Wow. By far. So.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got 2 more on my list.
Yeah, I'm going to pare mine down to the 2 most important here. Next one is from a comedy. Mostly comedy, but it's back in the 80s when...
by the way, when you said comedy, I was like, I really hope, because there was a moment where I was considering, just for fun, throwing like, when I taught myself how to find myself.
Well, all right, for comedy monologues, one that was on my larger list, but not in my top 5, was Animal House. Bluto's speech,
Oh, sure.
I think, is it is great because it's motivational. It is
IPA
IPA,
and IPA.
a Sweetwater. It's a little Sweetwater. That's just a great one. But the one that carries a little bit more weight is from Tootsie.
That's a great one, actually. I didn't even think of it.
And it's Tootsie was one of those movies I saw when I was very, very young. But even then, it was one of those where you can kind of recognize that you're watching something pretty amazing. And it is a movie that's played largely for laughs, but there's definitely more. Like I said, it was kind of that in that. More so than what Apatow tries to do now, but there were movies that tried, I think, a little bit harder in the very early 80s, and those comedies that really tried to hit the heart and hit, really strong characters, even though you're talking about a movie about a man that dresses up as a woman.
But Tootsie's, it's Sidney Pollack.
If
you look at his track record, Sidney Pollack
Absolutely.
didn't direct that many movies in his career.
Yeah.
And the movies that he did direct were very consistent in quality. So.
Yeah, it's beautifully delivered, and it's also I'm always amazed or most impressed when you see great range within one single performance, and I think you really see that with that. You always see that with when Dustin Hoffman's playing a really well written meaty role. He does a very good job of segging in and out of comedy and drama and really, really inhabiting these characters that feel extremely real, that even the things like looking at The Graduate or just some of his work is just always so interesting to watch the evolution of the characters, and I think that's a monologue. It's a great culmination of the whole movie for his character. So that I guess would be my number 3.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that one a lot. Well, my number 2 is another very famous film or very famous classic scene. Well, not like not talking about in old school cinema, but it's considered classic among especially avant-garde cinema, which is the speech in Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, when he's telling the story about how he met his wife with Natasha Kinski, who plays his wife, listening in the room behind him. It's a 10-minute sequence where he's telling this story, and it's one of the one reason why it isn't number 1, because it is, I think, my number 1 favorite scene of all. It might be one of my favorite scenes of all time. It's just incredible. The one reason why it would be knocked off of number 1 on my list is because so much of the scene, or the power of the scene, is based off of Kinski's performance, who doesn't say anything, who's in the room behind him. So, and this is Harry Dean Stanton who delivers the monologue. It's, for those who have seen it, you understand why. It's an 11-minute sequence where you're talking between 2 people in one room, or in two rooms that are right next to one another, but they can't. There's a one-way mirror and they can't see. And it's brilliant. It's poignant. It's sad. It's depressing. It's heartfelt, and also very hopeful at the same time. It's just basically covers this complete spectrum of emotion. It's one of the greatest speeches of all time. So that's all that can be said about the speech in Paris, Texas. This is how I got to know you.
Yeah.
Speech.
No, it's a great one. It's like I said, Ben and I will most of the time tend to make lists that are differing. Kind of, I'll lean towards more of the poppy stuff. That's good. And that actually is going to probably tie into Greg's idea for the podcast for us, which is kind of putting us on the interview chair, just because. And honestly, this is this is me having my little monologue moment, my heartfelt speech to the few fans we have out there. One of our, I think, mutual goals with this podcast, obviously it's just, kind of to talk about movies and stuff, but it's really to raise an interest in films. And what's good is that Ben will talk about movies that I haven't watched, or that I haven't watched in a long time and I want to kind of re-examine after the conversation. And that's kind of what any kind of movie podcast is really aiming for, is to get people to go out and rent more movies, watch more television, which, by the way, we'll get to at the end of this, a couple of TV monologues as well, I think, that are important. We kind of mainly want to film with this.
Yeah,
but,
we can.
And we also want to do a TV podcast soon, I think.
Oh, well, we can do a couple TV circle. I mean, you're going to do most of the talking on that one.
But yeah, like, hopefully you guys find this kind of stuff interesting. And that was what Greg said. Greg's pretty educated as far as pop culture film. You know, he's seen a lot of movies. But he's mainly a sports guy, and he goes, I want to do the sports guy asks the movie geeks questions. He's like, I've listened to these casts sometimes, and he's like, I just get lost in them. But I'm still listening because he's so fascinated. But he's kind of, hopefully other people are using it the same way as I enjoy talking to Ben, is kind of as this film school of, you know, getting an education about film. But, all right, so that's me off my soapbox. My number 2 is from one that we've talked about a lot of times, saying it's one of the most perfectly crafted screenplays, or at least textbook-wise, is Good Will Hunting.
Yep.
And
I knew it was going to be on there, and actually, I was kind of waffling with it.
Yeah,
a little bit.
I figured it wouldn't hit your list. I had a hunch that it wouldn't hit your list. And I understand, and I can definitely understand it. It is surgical in
lack
its
of a better
precision.
word.
Yeah, in its precision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of just delivering exactly what needs to be done for the movie, for the characters.
Sure.
But I think that it's easily one of those monologues that could be bungled. And you see that in movies sometimes. You'll see speeches that you'll watch a scene in a movie and you're like, it just doesn't feel authentic, or it just doesn't...
Oh, absolutely.
It's not working for me, it's whatever. And it's a difficult speech to pull off. You've got a character that is... First of all, you've got a character that's going to turn the audience almost against the lead. Not against, but the speech is meant to put Will in his place. And up to this point, you're kind of, as the audience, rooting for this character that's this, you know, underdog that's like showing up all these Harvard assholes, and he's doing all this. He's doing all these things that make him subversive and smarter than everyone else in the room. And it's the first time the tables get turned. And they get turned not by someone outsmarting them. They get turned by emotion. And that's really what always works for me in that speech, is like and for me, really, it's the end of it. Most of it's just a lot of flowery poetry, and he's talking. But it's that when he turns on him in the end, he's like, but if you think for one fucking moment, you know me, you know what I went through in the pain. It's harsh. It is very cold, and it just elicits a really, really great response. And
no, absolutely, I completely.
That's why that one hits number 2 for me.
Yeah, excellent. Do you have any?
See if I have any other honorable mentions before we do a very brief TV talk.
Well, I've got mine.
Yeah, you've got go to your number 1, and then we can.
Okay, well, my number 1 is, like I said, I kind of put it there at the expense. I think that my hesitance in just kind of letting loose with it is that I realize it's on the nose. I realize it's way too over the top for a lot of people. I realize that some people feel like the context isn't strong enough or the context of the speech isn't strong enough for the substance of the film. I realize that it's a lot of people don't even like the movie that much, and I would argue with most of those people, but I do think it's worth mentioning. My number 1 monologue involves the main character walking into a bathroom, seeing the words "fuck you" scrawled on a mirror, and then launching into a tirade that also sort of exists, sort of like JCVD outside of the film, which is 25th Hour, Spike Lee's 25th Hour. The speech that Ed Norton essentially gives himself to them in the mirror, it's a matter of him saying, basically, his speech is entitled "fuck you," and he's essentially saying "fuck you" to every single culture and subculture that exists in the New York metropolitan area. It encapsulates all of the hate that New York is capable of between the different types of people that live there, while sort of also embracing the fact that this is that melting pot, with the context of it being that all of these people are so everyone exists in their own little world.
Yeah.
It has their own worldview, and it's all so misguided and so wrong. However, even with the knowledge of this character managed to fuck everything up and be the worst common denominator among all of the bad people in New York, and managed to be that negligent and that poor of a decision maker. It's 4 minutes of hatred. So it's spewed, and
it ends the movie, which is
no, it doesn't end the movie.
Well, it's right at
no, it's right in the middle of the movie. He leaves the bathroom at the club.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah, he still gets beat up by
Barry Pepper.
Yeah. So spoiler alert. No, but it's a great speech about New York. It's a great speech about the way that people see other people, especially the way that people generalize other people. You look at, and the idea is that in this speech, he's taking everything you're not saying, oh, look, there's that Mexican family. He's like, look at that spick who married that nigger who did this and this and this. And you don't feel emboldened by the fact that Spike Lee directed the movie, but you kind of do. You're kind of okay, this is race sensitive, and it's being done by a guy who is made his name off of being race sensitive, who is sitting here basically. But the way that he sums up each of these personalities is perfect.
Yeah,
it's perfect. It's generalized. It's hysterical. It ends up being my favorite monologue probably of all time. Like I said, that was the one I was trying to make the differentiation on, because he's talking to himself in the mirror and you're seeing all
everything else. Yeah,
where he's talking about the Northside Bronx ballsters. They never pass the ball. They all, it's hysterical the way that he runs through this group of people like they're nothing. They're warm butter, and then at the very end, just is completely self-deprecating and says you're the worst of all. Basically, you had everything and you threw it away, and that's one of the last lines.
I have a very interesting project suggestion for you and or us.
Yeah,
I maybe someone's thought of it. It's a weird mashup, and we're easily, obviously, a decade too late on being relevant with it. It'd be really fun to reshoot that scene. Do you need to? You might hear some babies crying in the background.
I'm one baby.
We're
about to finish up here.
You're right here. I was gonna say you should do it with a high school. Do the exact shot for shot remake, but do it as the lunchroom table clicks, and run through a high schooler redoing that speech in a somewhat gentler way. But it'd be because it's really the same thing. That's for me when I watched that scene and looking at that stuff, part of me was just this. That's how I viewed it. Almost is we haven't really grown much. We don't really grow much as adults. It's still really the lunchroom. It's still really just all of the different cliques and areas there. Do you want to? Maybe we'll hold off the monologues for TV one to another TV podcast.
Yeah.
Might be the better idea, since Ben does need to play Mr. Mom just a little bit tonight.
Well, I've actually had my kids out here the entire time. They've been smoking and drinking.
Yeah, they're good. You put a bottle of beer in their mouth.
Well, one just went inside and tried to get into my liquor cabinet, so I was like,
he's going to get it beaten.
Well, it's beer before liquor. I was just like, you're fine. You can have some of my scotch. Just please don't drink that, after 9 p.m.
I was trying to see if there are any more on the list here that we didn't hit. Taxi Driver is a kind of a quintessential.
And I'm there were a few that I didn't mention that I like. They're more recent, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, where he's talking about how he met.
Well, and there was one I didn't put either on my list. I thought you might hit one of them. Is that Pulp Fiction actually has a couple of pretty well done monologues between. Whether you look at Christopher Walken or at Samuel L. Jackson. So those deserve mentioning. Dr. Strangelove almost made it onto my list, but not quite. I I was thinking also of like Daniel Day-Lewis movies, because you could also, he's another one like Pacino that you can pretty much take any Daniel Day-Lewis movie is going to have some monologue in it. For some reason, I singled out Gangs of New York and Lincoln, which
I like Gangs of New York's monologue where he's in bed.
Yeah.
And he's talking to him. That's good.
Yeah, and then and my last two just goofy ones, Stripes. Bill Murray has a pretty amazing monologue in it.
What the hell's the matter with you?
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic actually. And I will give Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive for having one of the most quoted pseudo monologues. It's not really a monologue; it's a series of yelling. I don't know how you describe him talking about, like, we have a fugitive on the loose. It's sort of a monologue.
It's kind of a monologue. It's more just it's a bunch of directives is what it is.
Yeah, as we say, it's just a bunch of commands. But anyway, we you guys can find us, of course, on our website, lastpintprod.com. We will hopefully get Ben on the Twitter front for those of you that are tweet fans, and he can tweet on your twat with your Twitter and get you guys all lubed up over there. I don't know what that means.
It's obvious that Matt doesn't use Twitter very often.
No, I have no idea what in the guy's name is. A little bird on my phone that gets no love. Unlike the other birds in my phone who get lots of love.
I was going to make the joke, and I knew you would.
I had to. And of course, the best place is really Facebook. Or you can, honestly, if you're not friends of us, but and you're not seeing any posts on our Last Pint Prod Facebook page, friend us on Facebook. Matt Schenk in Boynton Beach and Ben Wilson in Lake Worth now, I think.
Benjamin Scott Wilson.
Look us up. Drop us a line. Let us know you like or hate what we're doing, and we'll attempt to please the masses.
Absolutely.
So it's been The New Way with Ben and Matt. I'm Matt.
I'm Ben.
We'll talk to you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.